So thanks everybody for coming this evening. My name's James. So my job, as you can probably imagine, is I do a lot of market research for lots of different organisations. So to be honest, not always with cameras. So this is as unusual as for me as it will be for you. The discussion has been put together by a group called IATA, and my colleague Chris is from IATA. And IATA is an organisation that represents some of the biggest airlines. So they will often come together to create a common position if they're trying to explain how certain issues should be changed or how certain problems might be addressed. On this question about things getting worse, things getting more chaotic, just to play devil's advocate, I remember, when I was young and, when I was a boy, there were just fewer flights, and they were more, it was more expensive. And obviously with the expansion of the E and all the rest of it, there's more flights. It's certainly cheaper, and that brings its own issues with it. But do you think that some good has come of?
I don't think it's worse. So
you do not think it's worse?
No, I don't. No. I think it's better because for me, remember I said I don't like waiting. And you see how you can sit down, you can get on the internet, all of that to me has made it a bit more, even though I hate the waiting and I think it's too long, I think it's better. And even the communication, I find that the communication's better now. Yeah. See, for delays and things, I feel like I'm getting more info, even though it's not great, I still think it's better than how it was before. Because I remember when I used to travel, I'd just be feeling there's no information, there's no way to get anything. And that's how it is.
Yeah. I used to go to Warsaw about 15 years ago, and there was only one flight available. Yeah. Now there is 3 a day.
Yeah.
So you've got bigger choice, obviously, but
so I'm just wondering,
it's more planes flying.
With that in mind.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it is globalization, but then yes, it's cheaper. Yes, we afford to travel more often, but we are actually almost doing it ourselves. So there is more people traveling. Before you would have, as you're saying, there will be fewer flights and there will be fewer people traveling. Yeah. So it's inevitable there is more traffic and there is things wrong. But I think it's quite annoying when you get to the airport and it says, well, your plane is now landing in Barcelona. Yeah. I need to get into that plane and they need to come back with that plane before I take it on again. So at that point, you expect the company to go, okay, we have another plane now. Yeah, okay.
Or maybe communicate ahead if they know that. So that you're notified saying an hour, 2 hours, you can stay home a bit longer.
Exactly. But you're not everybody, but I think your collective first reaction was to sort of suggest that things had got a bit worse. But when we actually talk about it, it's sort of...
No, it's not about things getting worse, but you're asking us what is the current situation of it. Yeah. Of course that changed, right? I don't know, 10 years ago it wasn't possible, or 15 years ago it wasn't possible to basically go to an airport, just take hand luggage and check in an hour beforehand. Yeah. Now you can do that if you're brave, if you want to risk it at Stansted or somewhere else. But, it's still, if you compare it, for example, to Eurostar travel, which is also going to a different country.
15 years ago, when a flight used to cost me £400 to go to Seville, very rarely they were late.
Yeah, they were rarely late.
Yeah, late. Yeah, because there wasn't that many planes in the sky. Yeah. But nowadays, if you buy it quite well in advance, you'll pay £80 or £90 return. Yeah. But I think you get what you pay for. Plus also all the hidden costs. But you go online, you see a price, wow, it's very cheap, and then you have to pay for the seat, you have to pay for this. If you want to take your suitcase into the plane, you have to pay. Yeah.
This is really about the airspace and why does the airspace above us matter? It's an incredible network across Europe, and I think it's just worth having a think about it. This is just a shot of a kind of typical day across Europe with the flights, and you can see this is an extraordinary network of 28,000 flights. And 941 million passengers. So that's 28,000 flights a day. It really is phenomenal. And 941 million people, that's just in Europe flying. Wow. So, I mean, makes you think how incredible it is that we managed to make this system work. But there are problems. Okay, so what happens when it breaks down?
Sorry, the 941 millions.
That's
per
European
year.
passengers in Europe coming into and out of Europe.
A day.
A year.
A year.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't have 1 billion people like every
No,
day.
there are about 4 billion passengers a year worldwide, and about nearly a billion of them in Europe. So I mean, it's the same in the US, same in Asia, and it's just expanding at an incredible rate. So the network it's a critical network. It's a bit like the road and rail network. You saw with those flight paths, they almost look like train tracks in the sky, right? You can't just fly anywhere. You can see the bands get thick as all the flights get funneled in a certain way. And it is a critical infrastructure, and unfortunately it is under a lot of strain because the flights are increasing by a substantial amount. 5% a year is roughly the passenger increase number. So it's making it very, very difficult for air traffic control to cope, which is a lot of the reason for the delay that you've been suffering and hearing about. So just to give you some context for that, in 2016 alone, the delay increased by 10%. And there were 15.5 million minutes of delay in Europe. So some of you probably suffered from that. I apologise. And unfortunately, it's set to get worse because of this increase. So it's a significant problem. And I just want to show you a bit about why there's a problem. So I don't want to pick on France particularly, but here's an example of what happens when a sector in France gets closed down. You can see that red box there, and the number of flights, they have to be routed around it. Far fewer flights can go through. And the issue is that the delays and cancellations ensue, but then that ripples to other countries. So flights to Italy get delayed, flights to Spain get delayed.
It happened to us because of France. Yeah, it happened. It's true.
It does happen a lot in France, I have to say. Didn't want to pick on particular, but yeah, we do have issues in France.
Only knew the salary of the people, it would be a bit more like.
So there's just an example of why that delay gets knocked on to everywhere else, and because of the sheer number of flights, those 28,000, as soon as a plane gets out of position, it's in a mess, So these problems keep continuing. So what are we going to do over the next 20 years? We think there'll be 50% more flights just in Europe than there are today. So we've got a radical problem coming down the track. Basically, if we can't fix some of these problems of the airspace and the air traffic control, we just simply will have gridlock. We won't be able to fly these flights. So people, the choice and the lower costs that you were talking about have been the good things that have happened over the last 20 years. That's going to that progress will stop. The choice won't continue to increase, and the costs, aren't going to carry on falling because it's just going to get too difficult. So the only answer is we need a new plan and investment to diminish those delays. Now, there's a few things we can do. We basically have to reform and modernise the system, and I'll talk about that very briefly in a minute. But I just wanted to show some of the benefits that would occur if we can get this right. So we talked a bit about what aviation means to you guys in terms of your own personal experiences flying, but of course it's a massive economic engine. And if we can get it right, we'll have 1 million extra jobs a year from 2035. It's 245 billion euros a year to be gained if we can fix this problem. And it's actually, each flight will be 18 minutes shorter. So you start to see how your own personal time will improve, and business can do better, and freight can get around better. We're going to have 35% more flights can be achieved, and that means roughly for consumers, for the sort of average person on the street, they will share of 32 billion euros in benefits. So that's a lot of numbers I've been throwing out there, but I just wanted to show you that we can calculate that the benefits are significant. Just to give you some examples, in the UK, it'd be 116,000 jobs a year just from fixing the airspace. In Germany, it's 158,000 jobs, 45 billion. Italy, 95,000, 60. Everywhere in Europe, there are these brilliant opportunities for more jobs, more development. Spain, 65,000. So everyone stands to gain from this, but there's a lot of challenges. Just again to explain some of the benefits, that's how it breaks down in terms of combination of saving time, lower costs, more capacity, better choice of more flights. And there's the time savings. So the number is the 11.4 and the 8. So that's a mixture of shorter flight time in the sky and less delay on the ground. So that actually comes to 19, but 18 to 19 minutes saved. The numbers there talking about 7. That's actual money saving, not time saving. So basically, how are we going to make this happen? What it needs is for the airlines, the air traffic control companies, and the governments to all work together. These train tracks in the sky were originally set up in the 50s and modified a bit in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and haven't really changed since then. So the problem we have is that we need to radically reform this system, but there's a lot of political resistance. Every country has its own what we call airspace provider, so they sit there and they control the airspace, the borders in the sky, but actually of course a plane doesn't need those borders, it can just fly wherever. So you don't need each country to have their own controllers. We need to be able to reform the flight paths into the airports, and that means political consent from governments, from communities that live around there. So there's a lot that we need to do together to get this done. We need governments and countries to come up with a plan for delivering this. So that's what we're asking for. So I just wanted to give that presentation to give you some context around the challenge that we've got, all this vast number of flights, what we're hoping to achieve going forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just a quick question. You know, when I'm listening to what you're saying, I'll admit what you said, wow, like I'm blown away. It's a big problem, innit? But when I'm listening, I can't hear how you lot are going to be able to fix this. Because like when you're explaining, you got different regions, different country, then different, like, you didn't really explain how exactly you're going to solve any of this. It just felt like it's a problem, and I agree now, innit? But I'm sitting there like, I don't know how you're going to be able to do that.
Well, there are some much cleverer people than me who paid a lot of money to try and find the result that will fix it. Some of it is also airport capacity as well. You know, some airports probably need to grow to cope with just the number of flights coming in. But even if you say the Heathrow runway gets built, even if you built a runway, you still have to sort out the airspace. You can't just build the runway.
Exactly, they want to do another runway in Heathrow, but the problem is up there. It's not only down here. Yeah, it has to be.
So does your agency coordinate those different little national networks? How does it work?
Well, so here's the thing, right? So it's owned by these air navigation service providers, the air traffic control companies. They own the airspace tracks. They have the controllers. So we, the airlines, can't do that much about it. We can ask that there are changes made. We've invested in this incredible technology on the planes that can fly incredibly precise routes, so you can have the aircraft closer together. Part of that is a capacity thing. You have to space them miles apart. Well, if you can get them a bit closer together safely, that would obviously allow more planes to get through. So there are things we can do, but it needs these air traffic control companies to make these changes.
And how's that going?
Not so well, we would say.
Sorry, see what this lady was saying, where she said it's going to get to a point where it's saturated, and you said, yeah, we're kind of close to it. Like
in some places.
No, I hear you. So like, why not at a certain point just be realistic and say, we've hit saturation point here, that's really this, instead of like, because it almost feels like we're pretending, we're pretending that it's not, and we keep trying to fight into like, at what point is it like, we just say, look, this is saturated.
Can I ask Chris a question? What do you think are the sort of biggest barriers to the reforms that you're advocating?
So I can answer your question and your question at the same time, I think. So my answer is that we're not at a point where we've reached that limit and we can't fit any more in. I think what I was trying to show in my presentation, which perhaps didn't come across, is that I do think there is a way to solve the problem. Of course, eventually, at some point in the future, we'd hit the limit. But there are things we can do now. You know, what are the barriers to that? I think it does need political leadership, and it does need the air traffic control companies to make those changes and reforms, because the thing is they've got no incentive to change. That's the problem at the moment. They're, like you said, they make quite a lot of money and they're happy, and I don't want to point the finger at individual people. It's a stressful job and they're there to keep everyone safe, and they do a great job. But the fact is that the technology has moved on so much. I mean, planes can fly themselves. They can keep their distance automatically. So the planes can do so much more, but the air traffic control people are set in this old system of, we have radars and, you've got to go to this point before you can go to this point. And it's like, well, why can't we just go straight there? It would be so much quicker and easier. And things like that, these rail tracks in the sky, they're stuck with them that were fixed in the 70s, and they haven't changed. So that's what we need to make happen.
Some of the planes could be bigger maybe as well, just to accommodate more passengers.
Yeah. Just picking up on something that Chris says, this idea about sort of train tracks in the sky. This is sort of quite new to me. Has people ever sort of thought of it like that? That there's a sort of that it's like
I saw this.
No. It works the same I used to work for Arriva, which is a French company. We do the underground. It works exactly the same. So the way the underground works is the same way. Especially when it's automated in Paris, it works like this. You have a specific distance in each. So.
See, when I saw that made me have more sympathy in it, because I was like, right, this I get it. So.
You don't think that there is so many planes there when you are up there? You don't think that it's like that?
I think who's investing on it? Only the air traffic controllers? Because why to spend money when they're doing a job and it's working? Why they should spend any money? So all the people make more money. They should also make money on it, because why to change when the air companies are going to make more money and they're not going to make any more money, and they'll have to spend billions on updating the systems and all that. So everybody should get together and pay their shares.
But just one thing I would say, James, just quickly, is that most of the air traffic control companies are owned by their government, and the only one that isn't really is the British one, which is kind of semi-private. But everywhere else, it's run by the government, effectively, really. So that's why I put governments on that list, because they actually are going to have to tell the air traffic control companies, you guys need to make these changes. So they're a really important part of this story.
It might have to go to the European Union and make everybody work together.
On the air traffic control point that Chris was talking about, and also the sort of red box that he showed where the sort of airspace had shut down, were people sort of aware of this? I mean, obviously we're aware of strikes and things like this, but were people aware of the sort of ripple effect that this has?
No.
I wasn't.
But is this red stuff always there, or it means like it's always a problem in France with the air traffic control, or is it just when they go on strike, or because they're not often on strike?
It can be a strike, or it can be a technical failure as well. A radar might go down, or there's a.
So you mean
computer
we have
problem.
a lot of failure in France, basically at the moment?
I happen to pick a French example, but it's happened all over Europe. It can happen anywhere. The strikes used to be very bad in Spain, for example. They're not so bad nowadays. But it's still quite bad in France. But the problems occur all over Europe.
Okay.
So
and there is no backup plan. So basically, can you go away around it, like when there's a problem? That's what they do.
You do, but that's what causes the delay.
Like a delay,
because some routes become overcharged.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems also that because there's so little, I think at least my experience is that when there is a delay, it's under-communicated, so you don't really know how long it will take. So you can't really do anything really, and you're under-informed, and it looks as if no one really knew how long it will take for your plane to come. So I just wonder whether there's this organizational sort of problem as well that individual airports face. So they don't actually know where they will allow your plane to.
They don't know by themselves. So how can they tell you?
To jump on that, I think maybe it's just me, but I can wait as long as I know how long I'm going to wait. And I think it's something if it's taken on board, there will be delays. We know that. It's like on a bus. Now you always have this thing, or you have some app, and you know the bus will come in 5 minutes. Fine, I'm going to read.
Yeah, but how long can you wait until you get annoyed?
Isabel, sorry, you were about to.
I was just going to ask, how often, that red square that we saw, how often would that happen, and how long would it normally take to repair normally?
So there isn't a typical example, but so what we can say is that last year there was 1.3 million minutes of delay just from strikes and technical problems. So separate to all the general delay because the system's overloaded, all of those flight paths that you saw, that's like just small delays happen because of that. And then there are big delays when there's a particular strike, and they can last several days or they can just be one day. The other thing that happens sometimes is that they say they'll go on strike, so the airlines have to plan in advance and they'll say, right, we're going to cancel all these flights, and then they'll turn up anyway to get the money. But by then the flights have all been cancelled, so even then there can be a problem. So there isn't a simple answer to your question, but it happens quite often.
So just on the capacity thing, if you're trying to increase how many planes are in the sky at any one time, how do you get over that environmental clash? Because obviously you've got more fuels.
Yeah, actually that's a really good point, because what I said earlier about the kind of the waypoint thing where you go from beacon to beacon in these sort of tracks that they aren't always very straight. They zigzag around, and in fact what we know is that for those areas where they've experimented with much straighter routes, of course that actually saves emissions. So that is one of the advantages. The UK air traffic control company NATS have a target to reduce emissions 10%, and where they've managed to straighten these routes, they've achieved that. So that's a really great possible thing we could achieve.
Is that something that would be on your mind, that would be a concern of yours?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not the biggest environmentalist in the world, but that for me makes more sense of why you should do it.
Right.
Saying you're going to shave 10 minutes here and there when you've got all these transport issues of getting to the planes, saying you're going to have more available flights. I think there's so much emphasis on what we're doing to the environment, that surely is the golden cell.
But then surely if you have more planes after that, it doesn't change anything, no? If the idea is to increase the number of planes, the fact that you save fuels
I suppose what you would say is that it would be less bad than it might be, I guess.
But even some companies, they have the option of paying for carbon footprint.
Yes, that's true.
So in a way, if you are conscious about it, you could do it. But the big question is, like, that's similar to giving money for a charity. How much of that money goes where it says it's meant to go, and where it gets. So I think if consumers saw it was a bit more transparent of what we are paying and where it's invested and how it works, probably there would be, a better revenue from there as well.
So it's a bit of a side conversation, but what I would say is that there is a European thing called the European Emissions Trading Scheme, which aviation is part of. So basically growth above a certain level, they have to do this emissions trading, which is exactly what you're saying, effectively paying for emissions to be reduced elsewhere. It's meant to be all verified and you can check where those emissions have been cut. You'd have to go and talk to the experts about that. But there is a monitoring process to try and make that robust.
So on the... sorry.
So, just a side note, like where you're talking about straightening the routes, isn't there like a level of concern that if you straighten these routes, they're not tested? Like, you see, like right now, this has been tested, so you're like, well, there's not going to be no clashes, no one's going to crash, we've been doing it since the 70s, 60s, whereas like when you start straightening, you're kind of...
Like, as you said, the technology has changed so much now that planes are very intelligent, they know where the next plane is.
That would be...
That's what they're saying, that's what they're saying.
But that was exactly the point of this test last year, where they did start taking a few planes through on a new route.
It was a few, right?
Yeah, but obviously it would have to be done safely.
I got a question as well, because I don't really know how it works, but why don't people at the plane under each other on the same route? Because at the moment, is it like on this, or you can have a plane at different altitudes?
Heights. That's what I was thinking.
Because how many planes you can put on the same altitude on the same route at the same time?
I'm not sure how many the vertical separation is, but you can probably have 3 or 4 even.
So that's what we do today already?
Well, that's what happens with stacking. When you're waiting and circling, they're at different heights. You can see, if you look out the window, there'll be a plane below you or a plane above you.
So on a single route, you can have multiple
but even on a single route, there'll be other planes coming underneath and across.
Yeah.
So you cannot just travel like a triple layer, because there'll be others kind of cutting across.
Just to sort of dwell on the negative side for a moment. What would you mostly be concerned about? So I'm just thinking of things like theoretically it might be more difficult to book a flight, or costs will go up, or delays, or what would be the thing?
Safety.
That it would be safety would be
first. Absolutely, because I would not travel if it's not safe. if the safety was jeopardized, I will probably choose the train.
But then you wouldn't think of that when you're actually booking the train, your flight. It's not the first thing you think about when you're like
no
on the website.
Because at the moment it's still the safest way of traveling.
Yeah.
At the moment, but if we're talking about doing more and more and increasing, I don't know, I will be thinking about safety.
I'm sure safety is probably everyone's main concern.
It's non-negotiable. We would, I mean, that would never be.
No.
Imagine you have a city break 3 days.
Yeah.
You have a delay of 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
Who's gonna give me the 3-4 hours on one day?
That's I guess what
I can say to my manager, sorry, it's delayed. Give me one other extra.
What would be the sort of the nightmare? Is it like it goes up £100, or actually you can't rely on it anymore, or you can't get the flight that you want, or there are fewer routes that you might be interested in doing?
The fewer routes for me, because it's like everything else is like, you're grumbling, but you're gonna get to it. You can get there, but if you knew now, imagine now you knew you could not get flights for a month for a certain place you wanted to go to. That to me is the nightmare, because it's like then you'll be a bit like, I wish it was like that. I wouldn't mind a delay, rather than I know I'm not going to get a flight for a month.
Yeah.
So
or it would
that's
be better
the
to have
nightmare
less
for me.
frequent flights than not have them at all.
Yes. Does anybody else have a
I
different
think
view?
for me it's like I have that situation quite often that I want to fly ideally on a Friday at some point and going back on a Sunday, but then these flights are either super expensive or there are just no flights. So that means for me with like, like in UK you have like maximum 25 days of holidays, but because I have family in Germany, I want to like travel at least like every 8 to 12 weeks, let's say it like that. But then there's no option for me to go on a Friday afternoon or evening and go back on a Sunday evening. No, not really. Like it's not really that. Like I'm not from that area in Germany, so it doesn't make sense for me to travel by train. Like I have to go to Dortmund, and that's like then it's just like, okay, this is annoying because it means for me one more day of holidays to take.
Stupid question, but bear with me. We haven't sort of, people haven't really said so much that they're worried about costs going up. Do you basically fly as much as you would like, or would you fly even more if it was even cheaper?
We fly as much as we want.
It's more accessible when it's cheaper. So when it's more accessible because trains getting from you can get really expensive trains going to, I don't know, Scotland or to Leeds or wherever, and you could get a cheaper flight to, like I just flew to Berlin and my flight was like £50 return, and it's like I could do that. I could just go for like weekends away, whereas I would pay like £60 to go to Leeds and back on a train. So having cheaper flights, like when you want to just go somewhere so close, like that's perfect.
So if costs went up, it would be a problem.
Yeah, you wouldn't. I wouldn't do it.
I think the way forward for me is everything is centralised across. Obviously we cannot do worldwide, but at least Europe, Eurasia, or different zones, and I think that has to come as a united
I think every country should just focus on the planes that they are going to land in the country, not the ones that they are flying above the head. Somebody else should be controlling that.
So if I may say, there's a project that was started in the mid-90s called the Single European Sky, which is exactly what you're talking about. The idea that you would not have all these individual countries managing it, the stuff high in the sky would be run by 3 or 4 centres around Europe. It was all technologically possible. The individual countries would deal with it on the last bit into the ground, exactly like you say. And that is what has never happened for political reasons. And we're stuck.
When did that start?
In the 90s it was first proposed, and then they rebooted it in the 2000s, and it's still stuck.
What do we have Europe for, though? What do we have the EU for if they are not making sure all these things for the whole Europe, for the whole continent?
But every time they try and do it, there's a strike, and the minister in that country says, just get everyone flying again, I don't care, buy them off. And so the reform never happens.
But what is the actual reason? Like, why do they strike? Why?
Loss of jobs. No?
Money.
It's
scared.
It's partly a fear of losing jobs, although actually we've worked out that you can do it and not have to lose jobs, but you would have to relocate jobs because certain centres would close, but you'd amalgamate them in larger ones because there's going to be so many planes potentially in the future that you could still keep the same number of controllers, but they would have to move. And I think that's one of the main reasons.
I think you probably do realize the struggle. Like I know in France, because I had a friend working for that, it's ultra protective. So this is the people they work in this job. It's like there is union very, very strong. Well, it's going to be, at least for France, I can tell you, it's going to be really hard.
Well, maybe the government should back, just pay them off, or just make sure these people are not going to lose whatever way.
They block all the sky. There's nothing happening.
So but maybe it shouldn't be people from that country working on these upper level. It should be. I mean, when you look at United Nations, or when you're looking at a bigger body, forget about the French and the Spanish and the Italians. These guys will care with the landing and the handling and the baggage, but this kind of upper level should be done by a kind of bigger
one,
centralized.
Yeah.
What about the argument that we should build more runway capacity and new airports across Europe so that we can accommodate more flights?
I think that's harder.
I think they also should sort the sky first. And then after that, see what they can do. But to start increasing it already without knowing that we have, so the skies are so congested.
Another argument then, the government should reduce taxes on airports, airlines and passengers to boost the economy.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. Well,
any taxes.
It's a very simple one. We should make it more difficult for air traffic controllers to strike.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. How do you control that?
This is so easy to say.
I just read these things out.
Yeah, no.
Depending, I mean,
then agree that your right to strike should also be restrained equally.
But then also, on the same hand, you shouldn't be, as a teacher, you shouldn't be allowed to strike.
I cannot.
Nobody in the world should be allowed to strike. I mean, these people,
are
overworked.
And
they work overtime.
Yeah. If you're in a state school, you could.
Yeah, you could, but you have that big dilemma. You have
a moral dilemma.
And you cannot do it a lot because then you'll have 1,500 families whose kids are either on the street or they need to take the time off. So actually, there'll be a bigger impact for families.
On this issue, it's you can strike in some areas, you can't strike in other areas. Obviously, I mean, if you're in the police, you can't strike, obviously, because it's seen as being, it would be a disaster if everybody did. Whereas in other places. It's allowed, but is this an area where that a bit like something like the police, it just shouldn't be allowed?
Yeah, it shouldn't be allowed because it's very dangerous.
It affects too many people.
Yeah.
The frequency of flights, so number of flights, could increase by 35%.
That could be interesting.
More choice.
Yeah, definitely.
Better air traffic management and more flexible routes will reduce emissions and the burning of fuel.
That's definitely been worth considering.
Better air traffic management and more flexible routes will reduce emissions from the burning of fuel.
Well, that would be very
definitely a consideration, like increase a lot in the conscious of people.